I want to start this one. Of course, this is the weekend where we say Happy Birthday, America, for sure. And in doing that, I want to start with a Bible verse. It's really simple. It's a Bible verse, and it's from Proverbs 10:22. Proverbs 10:22 says, "The blessing of the Lord, it makes rich, and he adds no sorrow to it." Now, what you find is that God's blessing is something that enriches your life. And sometimes it's some of the simplest things that are the most enriching in our lives. I learned this from Benjamin Rush. He's a founding father. He's one of the signers of the Declaration, what we celebrate this weekend. John Adams, another signer of the Declaration, said that out of the 250 founding fathers, signers of the Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights, said your three most notable founding fathers are George Washington, Ben Franklin, and Benjamin Rush. Now, we don't know much about him today. He started the first abolition society in America. He started the first Bible society in America. He started the Sunday school movement in America. He started academic education for women. He trained the first black physicians in America. I just go through the guy. It's unbelievable what he did. And we own a lot of his original handwritten documents. We have about 160,000 items from American history, everything from Columbus all the way through the Bible that landed on the moon with Apollo 14. We've got 2 museums in Texas where we display the stuff. And we have a lot of Benjamin Rush's handwritten writings. And in there, we have his prayer journal. And so as he's praying, he will write down things in his prayer journal that the Lord shows him. He's going through the scriptures. And one of the things that he wrote down, he was on one day just trying to thank God for all the blessings he enjoyed, and he was listing them, and I was going through, that's good, oh, that's good. And he came to one, he said, "I thank God for all the times I have not fallen down the stairs." Run that by me again. Now, I'll point out, I just ran up the stairs and nobody noticed that. How come? Because I didn't fall. If I'd fallen, you would have noticed it, and that would not have been a blessing. So many things that don't happen to us are blessings. Like when you go to the store and don't have a wreck, you don't think about it. You would have noticed it if you had a wreck, but the blessing is nothing happened. And that's the way so many things are. And when you look at all the blessings we have, I think that we as Americans have more blessings we take for granted than any other people in the history of the world. You look, 4th of July, this is when they did the Declaration of Independence. And significantly, right now, there's 193 nations at the UN. We're one of 193, and every one of them have government. But when you look at the average length of a governing document in the history of the world, for 5,800 years of history, thousands of nations, hundreds of constitutional governments like we are, the average length of a governing document in the history of the world is 17 years. Now, what we celebrate on July the 4th is 247 years. We are so stable, we just think that's normal, and it's not. What we have is other people would love to have any part of what we've got, and we just take it for granted. And there's so many things like this that have become part of America, and we're really good at criticizing ourselves and having everybody else criticize us, but everybody's trying to get here. Everybody wants to come live here. The State Department says right now there's 127 different nations lined up on the southern border trying to get in. This is where people want to go. The academics, everybody else may criticize us, but people recognize we're blessed. We need to recognize we're blessed and be grateful for that. Now, within this framework, there's a guy who came to America in 1831. This is 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. He comes in 1831, and he looks, and he's the guy who wrote Democracy in America, Alexis de Tocqueville. And it's striking what he said about America. He came here because he was part of the Justice Department of France. He wants to see what justice is like in America. In France, they had 40,000 executions. In America, he got here, and one of the guy who was the head of all the judicial system, the entire state of New York, was lamenting the fact that in 18 years, they had prosecuted 8 murders in New York. That's a murder every other year. And he thought that was way too high. And they're in France where they have dozens a day. We're just different in so many areas. And he wrote about how different we were. This is a statement he made. He said, "The position of the Americans is quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one." He said, "I've never been to a nation like this." This is where we get the term American exceptionalism. Now, American exceptionalism, it really means that we're the exception, not the rule. We're not like every other nation. We're different from other nations. And what philosophy produced American exceptionalism? Well, this is something historians see very clear. You won't find this in textbooks today, but it doesn't matter whether you're a historian from a foreign country or whether you're a historian here. Let me just show you some of what de Tocqueville said about why he found America so unique and interesting. This is what he said. He said, "Upon my arrival in the United States, the religious aspect of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. And the longer I stayed there, the more did I perceive the great political consequences resulting from this state of things to which I was unaccustomed. This is not the way it's like in Europe and in France. He said, in France, I've almost always seen the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom marching and pursuing courses diametrically opposed to each other. But in America, I found they were intimately united and they reigned in common over the same country. He said the Americans combined the notions of Christianity and of liberty so intimately in their minds that it's impossible to make them conceive of the one without the other. What a time in America when you couldn't think about liberty without thinking about Christianity. Because Christianity produced the liberty that we now take for granted, and today we think the more secular we become, the more free we are. That's not the way it works. And so this is what we understood for so long, and this is what made us exceptional, made us different. George Washington, we as Americans already understood what Alexis de Tocqueville found out 50 years after we signed the Declaration. George Washington, after 45 years of public service, leading us through the American War for Independence, gaining independence, chairing the Constitutional Convention, becoming our first president. After 45 years, he's leaving office, he's retiring, he's going back to Mount Vernon, and he gave his farewell address. And his farewell address gave about a dozen warnings to keep America on track. He said, guys, we know this, we all know this, we've been through it together, but remember, and he gave about a dozen warnings. And as he went through those warnings, there's one that's I think is really pertinent for today. And he talks about political prosperity and what it takes to have political prosperity. And I don't know of many people today who would think that our politics is prosperous today. We're more weaponized and more pointed and polarized than we've been in decades. And he says, well, if you want political prosperity, he said, of all the habits and dispositions that lead to political prosperity, if you want your politics and government to do well, he said, religion and morality are indispensable supports. He said, in vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. He said, guys, I know a patriot when I see one. I had him at Valley Forge. I had him throughout the war. And I'm just telling you, anyone who tries to secularize the country is not a patriot. They're not helping the country. They're destroying the country. Now, that's a really strong statement. And we used to study that farewell address, for example, in school. For the first 8 years of school, you would take a written exam on Washington's farewell address every year for the first 8 years of school because we understood that if we became secular, we would be just like Europe and just like everybody else. So of all the habits that lead to political prosperity, if you want political prosperity, what you've got to do is you have to work on those principles of religion and morality. Now, see, this is the understanding that we had of the 4th of July. And this is why John Adams, on the day that they approved the Declaration of Independence, said that he believed that that should be a religious holiday, and it was for decades. For decades, our top two religious holidays in America were Christmas and the 4th of July. The Founding Fathers said on Christmas, we celebrate the principles Jesus Christ brought in the world through his birth. And on the 4th of July, we celebrate the application of those Christian principles into a form of government here in America. Those were our two major religious holidays, were Christmas and 4th of July. So we understood how important it was to have that perspective of religion and morality. Now, when you go back to, all right, how did this work out? How did this lead to the country we've got now and the perspective we have now? Go back to the Declaration of Independence. It has 3 sections. It has 161 words that set forth 6 principles of government. We're going to look at the first 3 principles. And then it has 27 grievances showing how Great Britain violated all these principles that God has set forth for government. And then at the end it says, now, with the firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge each other our lives, fortune, sacred honor. And that's where they promised to follow through on the commitment they made, and they did. We don't often study these guys today, but 10 of them did not live to see what they wanted the rest of us to enjoy. 17 lost every possession they had as a result of the signing the Declaration. 3 of them lost their kids. 2 lost their wives. Wives were made prisoners of war just like the husbands were. It was a difficult time, but they paid a high price for it. So when you go back to the document that they wrote, telling the world why we were doing what we were doing, it's significant that when you look at that first 46 words, at the 3 principles, let's just look at those 46 words for a minute. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now, those 46 words have 3 really important thoughts in them, and this is what we used to understand was fundamental to everything that went on in American civic life and American government. You take the first of those thoughts, and they talk about how the fact that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator. Now, certainly today, we're going to have a lot of critics say, well, they didn't really believe that because blacks were treated different. No. Come back tonight. I'm going to show you some things that you've probably never heard in your lifetime, but which all Americans used to know. As a matter of fact, let me just throw out something as a perspective. When was the first black person elected to office in America? 1641. Matthias D'Souza was elected to the state legislature of Maryland in 1641. White community elected a black man state legislator. By the time you get to 1876, we've had more than 1,000 elected black officials in America. Now, most people today can't name more than 2 or 3, more than 1,000 by 1876. Just to put that in perspective, Great Britain was the first nation to abolish slavery officially. Now, America is the first major section of any nation to abolish slavery. 1804, every northern state had abolished slavery, but as a nation, the South didn't come along till 1865. So Great Britain is the first nation in the world to abolish slavery, 1833. When did Great Britain elect their first black official to office? 1987. When did a nation like Russia elect their first black official to office? 2010. And America did it in 1641 and repeated it 1,000 times by 1876. Don't think I've ever heard that before. No, we don't cover black history very well anymore in America today. We try to polarize rather than unite. Going back to these principles, all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator. Now, what stands out there is they're saying, hey, there is a Creator. Now, this is significant. I've been involved in 13 cases of the U.S. Supreme Court. We're involved in a case the Supreme Court decided just last week. We're already involved in a case for next year. And strikingly, the court says, no. We got a lot of people in America who don't believe in God. We got a lot of atheists and others. And so government can't take a position on whether there is or isn't a God. That was not a problem in the founding era because they pointed out this is the unanimous declaration of all 13 governments in the United States. There is a Creator. I mean, we did not back away from that at all. And we had a lot of atheists back then, a lot of people from other religions as well, and that's fine. You don't have to believe in God to be here, but you just need to know that the country's going to operate on the belief that there is a God. And so this is the way we started. Now this is the first step in having a limited government. Why is that? Because see, what happens with a belief in God is we acknowledge that there's a power higher than government. You either have a big God or you have a big government. And if you don't have a big God, then government is going to play the role of God. And that's what most other nations do. In America, we said, no. Government is not God. God is God, and government supports what God says. And that's why we had a limited government. That's why we had more freedom than any other nation in the world. George Washington specifically talked about this on the day that we finished the Bill of Rights, on the day that we finished writing the first 10 amendments that we adopted to the Constitution. He issued a national proclamation for a day of prayer and thanksgiving. We need to stop and thank God. And in that proclamation that he issued, and we own that proclamation from 1789, in that proclamation, this is what George Washington says. He said, it is the duty, and by the way, notice the word duty. Today, that means something that you ought to do. In the dictionary of their day, duty means a legally binding contractual obligation. That's a whole lot different than just should do something. He said it's the legally binding contractual obligation of all nations, not individuals, but nations, to do 4 things. Look at the verbs that he used. It's the legally binding contractual obligation of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor. That is the duty of nations. No, government's secular. If you want religion, go to church. No, that's not the way we did it in America. That's why we were so different. That's what we believed on the 4th of July was God and government go together because God ordained government. That is His institution as much as the church or the family is His institution. So this was the first thing that we set forth in the Declaration. There is a Creator God, and it's our duty to acknowledge Him and include Him in all we do. The second principle they set forth in the Declaration says that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Now, what you get here is not only is there a God, but God has given us a certain set of unalienable rights. Now, this declaration, simple as it is, this is the second step in limiting government. How does this limit government? Well, it limits government because it establishes clear jurisdictions. Let me explain. Cowboy from Texas, got the ranch, got the horses, got the pickup, got the cows, got everything that goes with it. And on my ranch, I've had red pickup for a number of years. I really like red pickups. I keep buying red pickups. My son, Tim, didn't quite get the message, and he came to work on the ranch with a black pickup. And so I promptly spray painted it red for him because he needed a red pickup. No, I didn't do that, and the reason is it was not my truck. Anything that belongs to me, I can spray paint red. I can spray paint the roads red, I can spray paint my pastures red, I can spray paint the house red, I can spray paint the cows red, but if it doesn't belong to me, I can't spray paint it red. And essentially, that's what they said here. Hey, government, there are a certain set of rights that you cannot spray paint red. They did not come from you, they do not belong to you, and you can't touch them. You've got to keep your hands off them. See, this is a jurisdictional understanding, and that's what limits government, is there's distinct jurisdictions. So that was the second thing we said. First is there is a God higher than government, and second, government, there are rights that are higher than any rights you give. Now, significantly, we call those inalienable rights. And what's an inalienable right? Fortunately, the guys who gave us that document wrote down how they defined that. For example, if you take John Dickinson, you'll see him in the Signers of the Declaration picture. He went on to sign the Constitution of the United States. John Dickinson said, an inalienable right is a right which God gave to you and which no inferior power has a right to take away. Then you have Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton said, inalienable rights, they're not to be rummaged for among old parchments and musty records. It's not something government wrote down. He said they're written as with a sunbeam in the whole volume of human nature by the hand of divinity itself and can never be erased or obscured by any mortal power. Government's not allowed to touch these rights. They came from God, and it's out of bounds for government to touch. You have the same thing said by John Adams. John Adams said, inalienable rights are antecedent to all earthly governments. The right that cannot be repealed or restrained by human laws, the rights derived from the great legislator of the universe. So they all say these are rights that came from God, and they can't be touched by government. Now, this was a clear understanding of jurisdiction. But what would be included in those inalienable rights? Well, Sam Adams, the father of the American Revolution, he said, well, it's really simple. He said, in the Declaration, we told you that among other rights were 4 particular rights. And this is what he said. He said, first is the right to life, secondly, to liberty, thirdly, to property, together with the right to defend them. So there's 4 inalienable rights: life, liberty, property, and self-defense. He said, that's what we said in the Declaration, but he said that was among other rights. What were the other rights? Well, 13 years later, they did a Bill of Rights and said, let us just list them for you. And they said there's 5 inalienable rights in the First Amendment, there's 2 inalienable rights in the Second Amendment, there's 1 in the Third, the Fourth through the Eighth Amendment give about 8 inalienable rights. By the time you get through the Bill of Rights, there's 15, 16 inalienable rights set forth. Those are rights that government is not allowed to touch or to regulate. Now, that was their understanding. So that was the second thing that we put forth in the Declaration. Not only is there a God, but God has given a certain set of rights which government cannot regulate, cannot restrain. You'll find that these rights in every nation of the world outside of America are pretty much regulated. For example, self-defense. Do you know out of the 193 nations in the world, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to own weapons, only 3 nations protect the right to keep and bear arms. See, we're really unique. What we have is so different. And so the third thing that they said in the Declaration, really simple, says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Now that tells us the primary purpose of government. Government was created to secure those rights. That's the purpose of government. And Sam Adams, going back to him, he said it really clearly. He said government was originally designed for the preservation of the inalienable rights. What do you mean originally designed? The first time government shows up in the Bible is in Genesis 9. You remember, you have Adam and Eve, they have children, and Cain ends up killing Abel, and the whole world goes downhill from there, and then it's just rape and murder and pillage, and everything's going wrong, and God says, okay, let's just wipe it out and start again. So we have the flood. He saves Noah and his family, and as Noah is getting off the ark, in Genesis 9:6, God delivers to him civil laws. Jewish scholars call them the Noahide laws. There's 7 laws. And the first one there in Genesis 9, God says, okay, we're doing it different. It says, whoever sheds man's blood, by man will his blood be shed. That's what we now call capital punishment. Whoever murders someone else, you take him out. Now, why would God say you take out someone who murders someone else? Because the inalienable right to life. God gave you the right to live, and you're not to be murdered. And if someone murders you, take them out. So see, even the first civil laws was for the preservation of the inalienable rights. And as you go through those Noahide laws, here's what you do with thieves. That violates the right of private property. So the first government that God gave was to protect inalienable rights, and we understood that. And so that's what we have in the Declaration. That's the philosophy on which the Constitution was based. That's the philosophy that's made us different from all the other nations. And those three immutable principles, those principles that are in those 46 words, significantly, number one, there is a creator. Number two, the creator gives certain rights. Number three, government exists to protect the rights given by the creator. Now, notice that all of those are God-centered. Every one of them mentions God, which is why a secular government will never be a limited government. A secular government will always want to control and regulate. Well, we give you that. No, these are rights that came from God. Anytime you have a secular government, you're going to have a controlling government. It's interesting that even in the last Congress, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the House of Representatives, Jerry Nadler, made this declaration. Somebody talked about the right to life. He says very clearly, he said, God's will is of no concern to this Congress. That's a problem, because our documents are built on a belief in God and God's will for people and God's will for government. And if that's not of concern to Congress, we're not going to have a limited government. So secularism is really what destroys so much of this, and that was what we fought on the 4th of July with that document. We didn't want that. Thomas Jefferson, I think, said it really well. If you ever go to Washington, D.C., in the Jefferson Memorial, you'll find in there the statue of Jefferson. He's surrounded by 5 tableaus of engraved stone with famous quotes from his life and his writings. One of those quotes is out of the first book that he ever did. And this is what Thomas Jefferson told the world, because he wrote this book for France. It was published in America, but people in France said, you guys in America are really different. You see, by the time America has had one constitution, France has had 15 different constitutions in the same period we've had one. France went through 4 or 5 revolutions just under George Washington's time frame. So they were having government turnover all the time. And so they asked Jefferson, why are you guys so different? And he said, well, you guys in France, you're really secular. We're not. And so Jefferson, this is engraved in stone, he says, and can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis? Now, newsflash from Thomas Jefferson, what's the only firm basis of liberties? He said it's a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God. And notice the word conviction. He said the only firm basis for liberties is a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God and they're not to be violated but with his wrath. Don't tick God off. Don't do things that get him upset. And if you start messing with the liberties that he gave to his people, you're going to get him upset. He said, indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and his justice won't sleep forever. He said, don't get God stirred up by violating what he said countries should do, what nations should do. And so we believe at the very beginning that this was God ordained, that this was, God had principles, the Word of God sets those principles forth. And so that was what we believed about the Declaration. This is the philosophy that's made us different from every other nation in the world. You know, Abraham Lincoln, at a time when America was dividing and splitting apart, and we no longer believed that all people were created equal and we had certain classes, this is what Lincoln said in a great speech in the Lincoln-Douglas debates back in 1858. He says, my countrymen, if you've been taught doctrines conflicting with the great landmarks of the Declaration of Independence, the very things we looked at, he says, if you listen to suggestions which would take away from its grandeur and mutilate the fair symmetry of its proportions, let me entreat you to come back to the truths that are in the Declaration of Independence. Now, that's a good thing to do on the 4th of July. It's what we celebrate this weekend. Come back to the truths that are in the Declaration of Independence. That's not just a governing document. That's a philosophy that tells us how the country is to operate. You know, it's interesting, John Quincy Adams, who argued a number of cases at the U.S. Supreme Court, John Quincy Adams, who argued the Amistad case, and if you've never seen that Spielberg movie, it's a really good movie based on an 1844 Supreme Court or 1841 Supreme Court decision. But John Quincy Adams said this. He said, the principles proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence were embodied in the Constitution of the United States. See, the Declaration set the foundation. The Constitution says now that we have our boundaries, now that we know our value system, let's tell you how it operates under the value system. He continues, said the Declaration of Independence was the platform upon which the Constitution of the United States has been erected. If you take the Declaration as values out, the Constitution will not work well. The Constitution doesn't contain many values because they were all in the Declaration, and that was the foundation for the Constitution. And that's why you find people like Sam Adams. He said really clearly, he said, before the formation of the Constitution, the Declaration received and ratified by all the states in the Union. It's never been disannulled. You can't separate the Declaration and the Constitution. One's the value system, one's the operational system. People today try to look just at the Constitution. You got to go back to the value system. And the value system is there with the Declaration. So we need to come back to the truths, and that'd be my challenge this morning. Now, let me get more specific for just a few minutes here. When you look at this is all dealing with being God conscious. Everything they did in those first three things was to keep us thinking about God. Keep thinking about God. God's the origin of government. God's the origin of our rights. Government exists to protect what God gave us. This is a whole lot what we see in Romans 1:28. If you remember that passage, Romans 1:28, it says, since they did not think it worthwhile to retain a knowledge of God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not to be done. When you stop being God conscious, your behavior changes. And that's what's happening in America. We stop being God conscious, and our behavior is changing significantly. We're more secular than we've been in the history of the nation. We do a lot of polling, working with George Barna, et cetera. We've never, 120 years of polling, we've never been in the place where we are now. This is a new experience for America to be this secular and to think that government's supposed to be secular. It's not. You see, we've had lawsuits over little bitty things like the national motto, over under God in the place. Why do people object to just 2 words or 4 words? It's such a simple thing, because it's part of being God conscious. If you stop being God conscious, you can do all sorts of other things. And so God consciousness is a very big deal, and that's what the founders wanted us to do. And you'll actually find that in the indictments back in those days, it said John Smith did commit robbery, having no fear of God before his eyes. That's literally in the indictments. Because this guy didn't fear God, he went off and did something wrong. See, being God conscious affects all sorts of behavior, and we did not have a secular government. And the 4th of July made that really clear. So, challenges for right now. So, what do we do right now? Let me give you 3 specific challenges. Start with a challenge that came from a minister in the founding era, Matthias Burnett. Matthias Burnett in the founding era, talking about the rights that God had given, the victories we'd achieved. This is what he said. It's a good challenge. He said, to God and posterity, you're accountable for your rights and your rulers. So to God and to our children, we will answer for what happens with the people we choose to lead us and the rights that we have or the rights that we lose. He said, let not your children have reason to curse you for giving up those rights and prostrating those institutions which your fathers delivered to you. So if you're my age or younger, if you're, say, 40 or 50, is the school board you have today as good as what it was 20 years ago? If not, whose fault is that? Don't give up the rights and the rulers that our fathers gave us. We got to be good stewards of what God has given us. They literally believed that one day we would stand before God. He would say, what'd you do with your life? We would account. What'd you do with your family? We would account. What'd you do with your possessions? We would account. What'd you do with that country I gave you? No, I decided not to get involved in that. That's not an option. We're stewards over the country. This is a country that the documents made us as stewards, and they believe that we would stand before God and answer questions like, what happened to your school board? What happened to your city council? What happened to your state rep or whatever? We have to be involved in that. And right now, we know that only 1 out of 3 Christians on average vote in elections. That's not being good stewards. So 4th of July is a good time to remember, go back to choosing God-fearing leaders, leaders who will rule in the fear of God. Exodus 18:21, choose out from among you, it says men of faith, men who fear God, leaders, able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. That was the qualifications for office that we had from the Bible. That's who we should be choosing. The second challenge I would give us deals with the concept of speaking the truth. And today, unlike any time in our history, speaking the truth takes a lot of courage. We have recent polling numbers that say 77% of traditional value Americans self-censor due to the current climate. You know, I don't like that, but if I say something, I'm going to get jumped, I'm going to get deplatformed, I'm going to get canceled. And so what happens is there's a lot of stuff going on in schools and in the culture and in media, and we just don't say anything because if we post something, we know we're going to get attacked for it. You can't do that. You have to have the courage to stand up and speak, even if you get to. What if Jesus had stopped standing up once he got attacked by the Pharisees? We would not have anything that we have now if he had backed off because of the pressure. Significantly, when you look Specifically, the Bible talks to us about heaven and hell, and we know both of them are real. We know heaven is real. We know how to get to heaven. John 14:6, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and life. Nobody comes to the Father but by me. Only way of getting to heaven. We also know that hell is a very real place. The Bible tells us in Revelation 21:8 that there is a hell. It says there's a lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. And we know who goes to hell. It's in the same verse. The people who go to hell are the faithless and the detestable and the murderers and the sexually immoral and the sorcerers and idolaters and all the bad dudes. Look at all the bad things they do that send them to hell. But obviously there's something missing there. What is the first thing on the list of those that get sent to hell? It says the cowards and the fearful, having no backbone. Everybody else goes for what they do. These guys go for what they didn't do. They didn't speak up. They were fearful, and we can't be that. We have to have a backbone. We have to be people that stand up, even if it costs us consequences. We have to be courageous. We've got the Lord behind us. We've just got to do that. And so as Christian Americans, we have got to start talking more boldly. We've got to speak the truth. We have to speak the truth in love. It takes a lot of courage to do that, but we've got to go back to recapturing that voice. It's become a silent voice for too long. That's got to change. The third thing I would challenge you with goes to patriotism. This has directly been under attack for almost a dozen years now, that you can't love your country, it's too rotten, it's corrupt at the core, or they came up the last 2 years what they call Christian nationalism. If you love your country, you're a Christian nationalist. You're trying to establish a theocracy. Again, we get fearful and back. Oh, no, I'm not trying to. I'm not, and we keep backing up. And so every charge they make, we back away from it because we don't want to prove them right. Let me go back to something that Benjamin Rush said. Wise as he was, so knowledgeable in the Bible, Benjamin Rush said, patriotism is as much a virtue as justice and is as necessary for the support of societies as natural affection is for the support of families. Now, you know what happens when you love your family? You understand it's not perfect, but you're going to work to make it better. You're going to sacrifice for it. You're going to make sure everything that can go good for it will, even though it's made up of people and they've got flaws. If you love your country, it's the same way. It doesn't mean your country's perfect. It means you're going to work to make it better. It means you're going to get involved with it. You're going to do all the things that help it. And he says it's the same thing. He said the love of one's country is both a moral and a religious duty. It comprehends not only the love of our neighbors, but of millions of our fellow creatures, not only the present, but of future generations. See, loving your country and making sure it stays God-centered and that it can be a blessing, that helps future generations. The way it is right now, we're losing the country because we're backing away from that process and we're letting it become secular. Love your country, that love of country. Remember even Jeremiah, when they were taken into captivity in Babylon, how can a Jew that's been conquered by Babylon have any patriotism for Babylon? And God told him very clearly, this is what he said in Jeremiah 27:9, seek the peace and prosperity of the place to which I have sent you. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. If we seek the good of our country, if we're patriotic and love our country and seek good things, if it does well, everybody in it's going to do well. And that's what they understood even back then in captivity. If you're a missionary to France, why are you a missionary to France? Because you love France and you want the best for France. That's what missionaries do. They love the country where God sends them. That's why they go there. We need to love the country where God's placed us. And again, we're being talked out of patriotism in a way that I have not seen in recent years, this Christian nationalism kind of stuff. And so a lot of people are backing away from the flag. Oh, no, I don't worship the flag. Of course you don't worship the flag. You worship God. That flag represents something that God has blessed, but that's not the same thing at all. You don't back away from those symbols of patriotism. So those are the three challenges I would leave us with. And by the way, if this stuff is new to you, there's a table out back. We've got what's called the American Story that helps go through these things that you can do. And so the three things, again, be a good steward. And then the second thing is defend truth. And the third thing is to be patriotic, nourish patriotism, have that grow. And again, if you want this at the back, the American Story, this is a book on the lives of all 56 who signed the Declaration and their wives. See, we don't know the stories of these people anymore. They're just kind of obscure back there. They're a group that's got, every one of them had a story. Phenomenal things that they did individually, sacrifice for us. John Quincy Adams, when he was 8 years old, had his musket out with the Massachusetts Minutemen going after the British. That's the kind of stuff we don't hear. Elizabeth Lewis stood up to the British, was put in prison, and died as a result. Who has ever heard of Elizabeth Lewis? The stories are phenomenal. And that's what the Bible does, is it tells us stories of individuals. The final challenge I'll leave you with is a challenge. I would take you back to what was happening in the War for Independence. Once we declare a declaration, then we have to go to war to defend it. And if I take you to Valley Forge, if you study Valley Forge and you have a heart, you'll end up crying when you study Valley Forge, because what those folks went through was just unbelievable, and any of them could have picked up and gone home at any time. None of them had to stay the winter at Valley Forge, but they all said, we gave our word, we made a commitment, we got to be here in case the British move. And Washington had a hard time dealing with what he saw at Valley Forge every day. So Washington would get out and walk among the troops just to keep their morale high, just so they could see the commander-in-chief. And as he would go through each day, he went back and wrote. He kept very, very detailed records of what he saw. And this is describing some of it. He says, no history can furnish an instance of an army suffering such uncommon hardships as ours have done. And these are all volunteer guys. These are not paid soldiers. These are volunteers fighting for their country. He says, to see men without clothes to cover their nakedness, literally. He says, without blankets to lay on. There were several thousand lives lost at Valley Forge. It wasn't a particularly hard winter, but it is a hard winter if you don't have clothes and shoes. Actually, the British general, when we had the attack at the Battle of Trenton, the British general said, there's no way Washington's going to attack in the winter, because you can follow his army by the bloody footprints in the snow. They don't even have shoes. They're not going to attack. And we did attack, and that's why we defeated them at the Battle of Trenton, because we attacked, bloody footprints and all over the snow as they're fighting. These guys had a lot of courage, had a lot of patriotism. Washington continues, he says, without shoes, by which their marches might be traced by the blood from their feet. He says, and almost as often without provisions as with, going hungry. He says, and submitted to it all without a murmur. That's the great thing. There never was an insurrection over lack of supplies. There never was a thing that says, we refuse to fight unless you give us whatever. These guys sacrificed. They weren't wealthy people at all, and they sacrificed. He says, submitted to it all without a murmur is a mark of patience and obedience, which in my opinion can scarce be paralleled. So Washington writes, there's nothing in history that's ever been done like this, and if you've not studied Valley Forge, you need to, just to see what previous generations were willing to do so that we could be here this morning doing what we are now. And Washington, we went through a 6-month Valley Forge. On the final night before they broke camp, he wrote an order. And that final order he said, guys, I can't tell you how impressed I am with what I've seen for the last 6 months. I mean, what you guys have done, the patriotism you've shown, the sacrifice, the willingness to be here to contain the enemy. He said, to the distinguished, you're all patriots. I just never seen it. And he said, but I will tell you that to the distinguished character of patriot, he said, it should be our highest glory to also add the more distinguished character of Christian. He said, well, it's great to be a patriot. It's a whole lot more important to be a Christian. Now, what a tone coming from the commander-in-chief, that he would essentially challenge people to come know Christ at a time when they're already doing great things, at a time when what they're doing is already very laudable. They're patriots. They love their country. They're sacrificing for future generations. They say, yeah, that's great, but it's really more important that you be a Christian. And this is a point in American history where those who know Christ personally is a declining number. Over the last 20 years, nationally, we've lost 20% of Americans who profess to be Christians. That's why the country's headed in the wrong direction. If you do not have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, you won't understand the spiritual truths on which we're founded, and you won't be able to preserve the nation. This is not just a political being. This is a spiritual entity. And unless you find your place with Christ, know why he made you, why he put you here, what you're supposed to do, if you don't have that relationship with him, you can't serve your country the way you need to either, because he put you here for a purpose and time in this country. What did he put you here? What did he make you for? You got to find out your reason for existence. That's your fulfillment. And that comes only through a relationship with Jesus Christ. So if you do not have that personal relationship with Jesus Christ, I'm going to go right back to where George Washington went on the final order that he gave at Valley Forge. Hey, it's great to be a patriot, but it's a whole lot more important to be a Christian. We understood the basis of that even back then, and that's a good thing to remember on the 4th of July.